Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm gonna be doing my August and September wrap up. In total I will be talking about 9 books in this video. So let's start with the first book that I read in August, and that one was Don't Read the Comments by Eric Smith, which I ultimately gave 4 stars. So if you're not familiar with the plot of Don't Read the Comments, it basically follows two main characters, a guy and a girl. The girl that we follow is a quite famous gamer online, and she has her own streaming platform with quite a lot of fans, and basically she plays this kind of spaceship exploration type of game, and she starts getting a lot of hate the bigger her channel grows, and a lot of people are commenting on her not being good enough for the gaming community because she's a girl and she's also a person of color. I believe she's Muslim. And then the second side, the second character that we follow is our male protagonist, who is one of the casual gamers who also loves the same game, but at some point, due to certain circumstances, they end up meeting online and they spark a friendship. He starts learning about the harassment that the girl is experiencing in the online gaming community, and he kind of has a hero complex where he's trying to help everyone, but he kind of has to realize that he can't really help everyone and some people just have to fight their own battles. This book was actually very well executed. It went further than I would have expected YA contemporary to go. The harassment and the length that people went to really made me uncomfortable and made me scared for the female protagonists' well-being and life and safety, which is obviously a very hard thing to read about, but it was done very well. And the only thing that made me give it 4 stars instead of 5 is that I wish there was more exploration of why this hate exists and a little bit of a deeper look into the online hate, because most of the book it was just like, oh, there are trolls, they're all white men who are just being bullies and they're taking things too far and they're doing it just because she's a girl. And it doesn't really dive deeper than that. So that is the only reason that I docked a star. I just wanted a bit of a deeper conversation, but overall it was a very good YA contemporary book about the prejudices that women and people of color face. I listened to this one on audiobook and I really enjoyed it overall, so yeah, I would recommend it if this is the topic that interests you. So the next book that I read in August was The Love and Lies of Roshana Ali by Sabina Khan, which I gave 5 stars. This is another YA contemporary, and it follows our protagonist Roxana, who is a Bangladeshi American teen, and she hasn't come out to her family yet because she's afraid that because of the cultural differences they wouldn't understand and accept her identity as being gay. But she does have a girlfriend, and early in the beginning of the story, this is not a spoiler, her mom catches her kissing her girlfriend, and basically things kind of escalate very quickly from there. This book was surprisingly very harrowing and hard to read at certain places. There was a lot of conversation regarding obviously identity and also feminism, cultural differences. We had a very good look into the way the Bangladeshi culture differs from the American culture and how there are different expectations and different standards, but it doesn't mean that the culture necessarily shapes everyone the same way. I really was happy to see that there were people who were born and raised in Bangladesh that our main character ended up interacting with were supportive and weren't as prejudiced as some might think people born and raised in such a conservative space would be. Basically, I liked seeing that everyone had their own stance and they weren't necessarily influenced by the culture that they were born and raised in. I would definitely check trigger warnings for this book. It dealt with a lot. I don't really want to list them because I do think some of them could be spoilers, but there were a lot of hard things that happened that were very hard to read, especially if you're a woman. But I would absolutely highly recommend this book. This is one of my all-time favorite contemporary YA novels now, and I would highly recommend it. I think it handled the cultural differences and personalities very well. Definitely 5 stars, would highly recommend if this is something that interests you. Okay, so the next book that I read is one of the most transformational and inspirational books for me. I definitely, since finishing reading this book, have thought about it a lot. This is Educated by Tara Westover. So this book, if you're not familiar with, is a nonfiction memoir. The story follows Tara from being a young girl and kind of growing up with certain views on life as shaped by her mother, but specifically her father. She never went to public school, and so everything that she learned from what her parents told her and her older siblings. She is the younger sibling of, I believe, 7. She talks about how her view on basically any imaginable topic shifted as she grew up and as she started thinking for herself, and ultimately decided to pursue post-secondary education, having never gone to public school. There are definitely a lot of things that happen in this book that are hard to believe actually happened to a real person. There are a lot of physical traumatic things that happen to virtually everyone. There are car accidents and burns and work accidents that happen all the time, and because in their family they don't go to hospitals because they don't believe in the government and they don't believe in any of the official government establishments, including hospitals, including public education, because they deny all of these things. They don't want to go to the hospital, and so it kind of shapes the way they handle things very differently, and it's very hard to read and kind of hard to believe that somebody would handle it this way. The biggest thing that I think I took away from this book is that you are in control of how your life will go, and every time I think about this book, I just think, if Tara was able to do what she did and she was able to drastically change her life in the course of her life, having no tools available to her, she did it all on her own. It's just nice to remind yourself that you're capable of basically achieving and doing anything, and that your life is in your own hands. So yeah, I would absolutely highly recommend picking up this memoir. I think everyone can take something away from this story, and it definitely will make you think about a lot of different concepts and social constructs that you may have just taken for granted and never really given a second thought. So the next book that I read in the month of August was A Song of Graves and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. This is a YA fantasy, and it's kind of based in this fantastical world. So the first perspective we follow is Princess Karina, who has recently witnessed the murder of her mother. She's been affected by it a lot, as one would be. She recently lost other members of her family not too long ago, and so this was the last close family member that she had. This puts her in a very hard position. It forces her to kind of become the queen, the official ruler, and there are a lot of dangers that come with that, and she doesn't feel ready for it yet. Her mother was still young and she still had a lot to teach her. So because Karina doesn't feel like she's ready and she can't accept her mother's death, she decides to use magic to resurrect her mother. So she starts looking into the ritual, and she finds that in order to bring a person back from the dead, she needs a beating heart of a king. Because there's no readily available beating heart of a king, she decides to offer her hand in marriage as the prize for this event that is taking place very soon. And she plans to kill the man that she marries, who will win the contest, and use his heart for the ritual. And the second perspective I follow is Malik, who is from this oppressed class who is trying to basically enter the main city where the castle is, where the royal family lives. And he, at the beginning of the book, gets in a situation where his younger sister is basically snatched by this evil spirit from him and his older sister, and he makes a deal with this creature to do whatever it asks him in order to get his sister back. So the creature asks him to kill Princess Karina. And so, in order to get closer to her, he decides to enter the contest that is being held, because it will be held by the royal family and he will be able to live in the palace and have a chance to interact with her. And so basically, our two main characters are on a collision path to kill each other, but they're not aware that they're trying to kill each other. And there's some romance that is starting to bloom. That is all you need to know. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It didn't blow me away, but I think it was a very well executed story. I kind of lowered my expectations going into it. I thought, oh, this would be another one of those YA fantasies, haters to lovers, blah blah blah, whatever. But I really, really enjoyed the world building and all of the different creatures that were present in the story. I think this book did well what I would have wanted the Amber and the Ashes series to do well. The way that the magic system is developed and explored, and the creatures, the way they are described, is so much more interesting and captivating in this particular book, to me personally, than it is the way it is described in An Ember in the Ashes. And by no means are they the same world, they're not inspired by the same cultural folklore. But if you like An Ember in the Ashes, I think you would also enjoy this book. It has a similar type of magic system in some ways, but it's also different. So it's very interesting to see that. And I really enjoyed our characters too, but I think for this one, I could so clearly imagine the atmosphere of this world. Another thing I enjoyed was just the conversation of kind of oppression and prejudice towards a specific group of people. And I'm really looking forward to the next book. I don't know if it will be a duology or a trilogy, but I'm definitely looking forward to the next book. I think it could probably expand the world even better. And the ending was pretty crazy, so I think this book definitely lives up to the hype that has been created around it. So if you enjoy YA fantasy, I would highly recommend picking this one up. The last book that I finished in the month of August was Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. So this is obviously the conclusion to the Hunger Games trilogy, and I'm not gonna go over the plot of this book because it's the third part, but I'm sure everyone has read these books. And this was a reread for me, so all I want to say is I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. Again, upon rereading the series, I definitely came to the conclusion that it holds up. It very much holds up, and I absolutely enjoyed seeing the little details that were not present in the movies, especially because if we ranked how close the movies were to the original source material, the Mockingjay movies definitely took more liberties with the plot, and overall I really enjoyed seeing the details that I have forgotten after so many years of not rereading these books, and I really enjoyed getting back into this world. I've definitely seen the movies a lot, and they kind of reshaped my memories of books, and so I forgot a lot of the details. I think this is just as strong, if not stronger, than The Hunger Games and Catching Fire, so I definitely gave this 5 out of 5 stars and absolutely loved rereading this book. So those were the books that I read in August, and the next 4 that I'm gonna talk about are the books that I finished this month. I don't really want to rant about this next book, but I feel like I will, because this is the lowest rated book so far that I've read this year, and I've read 53 books, so I think that's saying something. I want to preface by saying that this is my personal opinion, of course, and I don't hate this book, but I feel like talking about everything that I didn't like about it will make me seem like I did. I don't think by any means that it's problematic, however, I wouldn't recommend it. Unfortunately, the book that I'm talking about is A Love-Hate Thing by Whitney D. Grandison. I couldn't really tell you what the plot of this book was, because there was none. All of the plot that happened in this book took place in the last 5 to 10% of the book, and the rest was just kind of meandering and seeing different characters and how they interact, but it wasn't even in any interesting way. So this book follows two protagonists. One is kind of like an upper class black teen girl who lives with her family in a very good neighborhood and goes to like a very prestigious school, and she's popular. She has kind of like a star boyfriend and cool friends, and she does pool parties, and she's always wearing a bikini because she's rich and amazing, and it's hot where she lives, so she just always has to wear a bikini apparently. The other perspective that we follow is the male protagonist, whose name I no longer remember, but he is also a black teen. However, the little town or city that he's from is known for its crime rate and kind of like violence. The history between these two is that when they were 7 years old, the grandpa of our male protagonist would work for the family of the girl, and he would bring his grandson during the summer to play with the girl, and I think they did it for a couple of summers when they were young. And so the last summer that they hung out and they were friends was when they were 7, and the story takes place 10 years later when they're both 17, so they're grown up and they haven't been in touch for the last decade. And something tragic happened to the male protagonist, and he has to basically move in to live with this family. And the parents are very welcoming, and obviously they knew his grandpa and they knew him when he was little, so they're very welcoming. However, the girl decides that she hates the idea of him living with her. She doesn't trust him. She's very prejudiced. She thinks that because he's from a bad town, bad neighborhood, he's bad, he's like, a gang member or whatever she thinks about him. So she definitely is kind of disgusted by the idea of living with this guy, and he's very hostile towards him. But the catch is, throughout the entire book, it's explained how she's actually very nice and friendly and welcoming, and she's known for completely acting differently to how she actually acts. And this happens a lot throughout the book, where characters act out of character. So the book says one thing, but then they go and do something different. This book is actually very long. It's over 400 pages, which is a lot for a YA contemporary already. It's really surprising how over more than 400 pages there is no plot whatsoever. Basically, our characters just interact with each other, and the female protagonist keeps pushing back, but then she starts realizing that maybe the guy is not that bad, and he is grappling with his past, and he is trying to assimilate into this new environment and make friends at school. And basically, it's just different interactions between the different characters. Some teen drama goes down, and then I'm not gonna spoil the end in case you wanna read the book, but basically the theme is just choosing your path, and should you be loyal to somebody who's ruining your life, basically, or should you kind of separate yourself from people who aren't really making your life better. What's funny is that I picked this book up thinking it was a different book. I actually wanted to read The Voting Booth. I gave this book 2 stars ultimately because I couldn't see any merit to it. The idea of what the author was trying to do is nice and it's an important conversation, but it wasn't executed well at all. I did not enjoy this book, but because I was reading it on audiobook, I just kept listening to it while I was doing other things. So somehow I went through this, I want to say 14-hour audiobook. I was listening to like 1.5 speed, so that also kind of helped. There are definitely books that kind of touch on the same themes, but they have a better execution. The book that I read this year, I kind of associate this one with, is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. And that audiobook was 1 hour long. It's a book that's written in verse, so it reads really fast. I listened to it on audiobook, and it also talked about the cycle of violence and kind of making your choices, and is it worth it ruining your life just for other people, or should you make decisions to kind of benefit your life? And that book in an hour had so much more impact and character exploration and had a good conversation about this topic compared to this book that took 14 times longer to attempt to cover this topic, and it did not succeed. So I wouldn't recommend picking this book up because I don't think it's written well. I don't think the romance was written well either, which is probably what most people would pick this book up for. I think there are more better romances. I'm not a romance reader, but I don't think this is a good one. This book has pretty low average ratings, and a lot of the things that I brought up are definitely commented on in reviews. So if for any reason you're still interested in this book, check those out. People definitely explain their thoughts more eloquently in some of the reviews that I've read. So yeah, if it interests you, I would just warn you going into this book that there are some things that just really don't make sense. So in terms of the logic and in terms of the plot, this book is very weak. This is my opinion. If you love this book, you know, good for you. I wish I could love all books, but apparently not. But let's move on to some better books that I read. So the next book that I read in the month of September couldn't be more different. The book that I read is Battle Royale by Kashun Takami. If you're not familiar with this book, this is basically the original Japanese version of the Hunger Games that came out years before Hunger Games did. And if you're not familiar with the premise, it's basically the country that this takes place in is referred to as a state, I believe. And so in this state, there is this program that takes place every year where there are different school districts in the country, and so from each district there is a random class, like grade 9 or 10, I believe, that is selected. These kids are taken to the specific place, which is kind of like an arena, which is cleared out for them. So if there are, you know, regular citizens that live there, it's completely cleared out for them, and they're cut off completely from the rest of the world. They don't have any type of communication available to them. They can't contact anyone. They can't send a signal for help. I believe there were 42 students, 21 male and 21 female, in the class that was selected. And so we follow this year's program participants for this particular school district, and they wake up from this foggy dream in this weird classroom, and there is this man that tells them, "You have been selected for the program." And everyone knows what the program is, but nobody ever expects to be selected, even though this is a thing that happens every year to multiple classes. Nobody ever expects, because there are so many schools in each district and there are so many classes within a school. So the chances of being selected are pretty low. But this class is selected, and after the initial shock, we follow almost every single student and how they are going about having to kill the rest of their classmates. There can only be one winner, and they're each kind of assigned this pack that contains a weapon and then I think like an additional object that could help them, as well as some food. The premise is similar to the Hunger Games, but the execution and the way that the games or the program is structured is very different. The atmosphere was much darker, and this book is way more gory than the Hunger Games is. I would say Hunger Games is much more Western commercialized type of book, while Battle Royale, it's clear that the culture is different that they're talking about. The way things are described, the way people think about each other is different. I don't think that a Western author would write in the way that this book was written. One thing that was kind of hard from the beginning and throughout the book is that there are many students to keep track of. So not only do you have 41 students, each of whom you at least hear about once or a couple of times throughout the book, but there are so many students who have similar names, especially the girls. I think there were like 6 names that were very similar, and so from the beginning it's kind of very hard to tell who is who. A lot of names are thrown at you, and I was listening to it on audiobook, so I couldn't even like refer physically to who was who, but I did at the end understand, and I stopped being so lost. But it was definitely hard, so if you're a Western reader and you're planning to pick this book up, I would probably recommend you read this physically. even though the audiobook was good. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. It was very gory and very dark, and it definitely had a lot of commentary on the government and how the government is corrupt and how a lot of people are suffering, but you can't really do anything about it. So it was very clear that the author was making clear stabs at the government. Overall, I really enjoyed Battle Royale. I would definitely recommend it to fans of the Hunger Games or people who want to read like outside of the American Western culture. I would recommend picking this one up, especially if the themes sound interesting to you, but I would warn you that it's gory and it's definitely not as easily digestible as the Hunger Games is, and it's very different, so you would be reading a completely different book. I ended up giving this book 4 stars and I really enjoyed it. Okay, so the next book that I want to talk about is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman, which I ended up giving 5 stars. Fredrik Backman is the same author that wrote A Man Called Uwe, which is quite highly praised book. I fell in love with the writing style. Even though this book is translated, I think it's brilliantly translated and it must have been brilliantly written. I personally think that this might be my favorite book that I read this year. I listened to it on audiobook and then I just ordered a physical copy because I know I will be rereading this book a lot. For those of you who aren't familiar, Anxious People is about bank robbery gone wrong. So we follow this bank robber who is kind of in an unfortunate position and they find themselves in a hostage situation that they didn't expect to be in. The robber basically is running away from police and they find themselves in kind of like an apartment showing. And there are all these clients that are potential buyers for the apartment. And so it's a very interesting group of people. So they're all kind of like a pain in the butt to deal with. They're all very weird and have their own quirks and are just absolutely intolerable. And it's so funny. This book, it kind of hit every spot that it could possibly hit. It was sad, but it was also hilarious. It had so much social commentary and it had like a murder mystery, but it was also funny. It's very hard to categorize the genre this book is. It's definitely an adult book. It's written so magnificently well. I absolutely fell in love with the writing style and how the author was able to make you think about so many different like philosophical concepts about life and people and relationships with people. There were so many bases that he touched on. And I found myself just wanting to highlight every single sentence because it was so beautiful. I can't express enough how much I love this book. I got so much out of this book and it made me think and it made me laugh and it almost made me cry. And it's just made me feel so human. And it made me feel so aware of all the other humans around me. It just makes you think of what humanity is, what being an adult is, what is existing in our world and in our society as a person and as an adult, and kind of all of the things that are quite impossible that we just have to handle, that nobody's prepared for. If you want to cry, or if you want to laugh, or if you want to think about things, if you are in the mood for a mystery or a funny book or for a tearjerker or for a literary book, pick this book up. It has everything and not in a bad way. It's so well done. This book has a very high overall average rating on Goodreads. I think it's like 4.4, 4.5. The vast majority of reviews is very overwhelmingly positive, and I find it so hard to imagine anyone not liking this book. I think you will definitely get something out of this book, and it will make you think, and it will make you feel empathetic toward people, but it also will make you hate everyone and kind of think about how stupid and ridiculous people are. It's amazing. This book is a contradiction, but it's such a wonderful one, and it's so intricately interwoven. Everyone's stories and backgrounds and thoughts and feelings fit into the story so perfectly, and you don't know how everyone is kind of related and relevant to the story until you read till the very end, and it comes together like such a beautiful puzzle. This is the kind of book that made me immediately want to read all of the other authors' books. Next year, I might pick up many more Frederick Backman books, but yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend. Please read Anxious People. So the very last thing that I read this month is the first volume of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's called High School is Hell, and it's by Dan Mora, Jordi Belair, and Raul Angulo. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, which I 100% am. As you can imagine, this is kind of a homage to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV show. The characters are drawn like the actors from the TV show, but they're kind of like revamped and upgraded to fit into more of a kind of modern type of setting. So it's definitely kind of more time relevant. It's presented like as a present Buffy. So the style of the clothes that they wear and kind of like the way they talk and communicate is different, but it's still the same Buffy, and we still see some of the old villains, I think, as well as some new ones that we haven't encountered before. So if you're a fan of the TV show, I think this is a great comic to pick up just for the nostalgia alone. I personally really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I really like the way it's drawn. It's kind of, you know, like any normal comic drawing style, but it's very beautiful. And I think Willow and Xander and Buffy are so true to the way the actors look, and it's kind of trippy a little bit. I absolutely enjoyed this, and I'm definitely gonna be picking up the next ones. This is not just a comic book version of the TV show. This has new storylines and new things, but with old characters. So I think that's kind of like the best thing that they could have done probably with Buffy. I would recommend it for all Buffy fans, and if you haven't watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, stop watching this video and go watch that. But yeah, those were all of the books that I've read in the last 2 months. Let me know if you have read any of these books or if anything sparked your interest. I hope that I convinced you to pick at least one of these up. And if I have, let me know down below in the comments. Please stay safe, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!